Eddie Jones is 9 games into his second stint with Japan after his dramatic exit from native Australia less than a year ago. His record so far reads 4 wins and 5 losses, but dig a little deeper and you find the game plan Jones is trying to implement at the Brave Blossoms is one of the most unique and innovative anywhere in the world. I sat down with Brendon Shields, a professional rugby analyst who has worked with Jones and specialises in Japanese rugby, to learn more. Moving away from the Rugby Championship and more looking to the Pacific Nations Cup, and a former Australia coach in Eddie Jones and how he's getting on in Japan, I think we've discussed outside of this podcast fascinating what they're trying to do there, and it was a fascinating tournament to watch for many reasons. But I want to talk about what you've seen. So your company Rugbycology does work for Japan or work in Japan and the Japanese league in particular. So can you just first talk about what Eddie Jones, from your point of view, is trying to do with this team and how that feeds into the whole Japanese rugby identity, rugby DNA as a whole?
Yeah, you can't think of Eddie in Japan now without looking back at what he tried to do in Australia just the year before. I think Joe is really lucky in the sense that Eddie ripped off that Band-Aid. He's one of the few people who could do that really quickly. It totally bombed in the World Cup for a lot of reasons, of which I think Eddie maybe had to do with as well. But now looking at Japan and what he's trying to do there, again, he's clearing the cupboard. He's bringing in a lot of new guys, but he's very, very ambitious as to the style that he wants Japan to play. And I think for the rest of the world, we look at Rassi, we look at how the South Africans were able to change, bringing in Tony Brown, adding a new element, picking a different type of player. Suddenly they're an exciting team to watch and study. But Japan are moving into a totally different direction. I don't measure speed. You guys measure rucks of speed, but Japan is obviously going to blow teams out of the water with that. I remember after the second Maori test, I asked Eddie, I said, look, this looked very different. There's
You asked him,
something here.
were you in a press conference or something?
Oh no, yeah. Obviously, after the Wallabies, we had a bit of a relationship around that
Really?
time with the Wallabies,
Okay.
and that's continuing now. But I just, statistically, you have a look at a game, and it just looks very different. And I said, look, congratulations with the win. They lost the game prior to that, the 1st test. But I said, geez, there's a few things here. What's going on? And he says, no, they had to sit down and realize that. Again, maybe like in 2015, Japan rugby has very particular strengths and very particular weaknesses. They're going to find it incredibly hard, for example, to compete in lineouts ever. So how do you come around that? How do you find ways of playing tier one nations and really finding a bit of punch and finding a bit of success? And I think what he's trying to do now is, from an attack point of view, make them incredibly hard to defend from a fitness point of view. All the new rugby laws tend to favor that. So it's easy to make those calls and say, right, if we can be the fittest team in the world, if we can make everything fast, if we can have a type of an approach to a ruck that allows us to have multiple options on attack straight off the bat and not necessarily wait for a set attacking shape. You'll see, I think if you look at some of the video work done now on the Japanese team, you'll see that their attack shape is not as structured, but instead you have a lot of players just running at speed onto different lies and giving the number 9 a lot of options to play off. So what a time to be alive that we have these teams now. I think you would have seen over the last, say, 10 years, we've been in a stranglehold of defense. Defense coaches became so astute and everything was super structured. And the attack has been on the back burner, but I think we are about to turn the corner. That's going to come from how we approach rucks and the type of speed we play with. Make no mistake, the new tackle law has an influence on that. The speed at which scrums and lineouts have to be set, the speed at which conversion kicks have to be made, the game is about to change, and I am very, very excited to see how attack coaches especially are taking up the mantle. Guys like Eddie, guys like Tony Brown are really trying to innovate in that space, and man, like I say, what a time to be alive.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind when you talk about Eddie Jones's Japan at the moment is speed. You know, whether it's ruck speed, just the speed of the actual passes themselves. I think their scrum half has been influential to that. Even the way that they, get around doing the scrums. You obviously don't associate Japan with as a scrummaging team, but it's the perfect in and out, and things like even their exits, like the way that they get the ball from a kickoff and they literally a phase and then kick it, and it's happened in 2 seconds, and that it's extremely proficient. It must take a lot of repetition from Eddie to make that happen. But again, similar to what I was saying about Joe Schmidt, is still conceding a lot of points as well. And we have to say that the Pacific Nations Cup, whilst we enjoyed it a lot, the level of rugby and the level of opposition that he was playing against wasn't that high. So
Yeah.
is this how far can they really go with this? It's very exciting, it's very innovative, but they came up against a Fiji team in the final, which was essentially the Drua team that finished mid-table in Super Rugby and got destroyed. And we talked about the fitness of Japan, but it really felt to me watching them that they weren't able to play this style of game for 80 minutes, and they would fall away quite badly in the second half. Is this a bit of a Hail Mary from Eddie Jones, really, in terms of this strategy that he's coming up with? Are they going to be able to take this to the level they need to in order to be competitive at tier one level?
Yeah, I think that's the main goal is how are you competitive against tier one countries. So playing against Fiji will always be a tricky one for Japan. I think Fiji have over the past few years gone for length. You look at their wings, you look at their outside centers, they pick tall players. Japan traditionally just do not have that, and definitely not with Eddie's new team selection. So there's a few reasons why I think even moving forward, a Japanese team might struggle against the Fijian teams of all countries. I think the loss against Georgia was the more surprising one for me, but it was earlier on in the development. Um, Make no mistake, I think Eddie has a fairly clear idea of where he wants things to go. But to build a skill set to execute that in big games could possibly take 2 to 3 years. And by the sounds of things, that's what he's aiming for. He's aiming for in 2007 to be able to slaughter some dragons again, and to get a play style. If you look at a team like Japan, they don't have to fight right now to beat South Africa and to beat England and to beat Ireland. But they want to challenge Wales, they want to challenge Scotland, they want to be able to challenge Italy definitely at all times. And I think he is building a game, let's say, philosophy and a kind of attacking style at the moment that will really, really trouble European sides. And from that point of view, I think it's smart. Try and first get up that rankings by beating, let's say, the tier B European sides. And then from there, you can challenge once you have a little bit more cohesion, once these guys have got a few caps under their belt. But I would say I'd be very surprised if Japan at this moment don't beat Wales, for example. And that despite Wales having maybe players that's been, it's still a young team, but guys who are playing maybe week in and week out a higher level rugby. I mean, Eddie has picked some guys who are basically fresh from university rugby into
Yeah.
JL1. So yes, a total rebuild, but I can see a little bit of method to the madness. But analytically, to track a team like Japan at the moment, super exciting because everything's different. And if for example, they can up these numbers of how many times they move ball, how many times they kick tactically, how quick their rucks are, and you correlate that with their risk level, and maybe also with a simple stat like points conceded, it's going to be fairly easy to track if this team can beat some of the big guns in a year and a half or two from now. God, I'd love to have Sunwolves back or some form of a Japanese influence.
I think that might happen. I think Super
Yeah.
Rugby is going to get a Japanese team back in, just for the money, if no other reason.
It looks like I, for a while, thought there will be JL1 teams coming in, but it's going to be too hard to align the seasons. JL1
Yeah.
starts a lot earlier than Super Rugby, and for many reasons to do with weather. So having, say, two Japanese teams and one or two Argentinian teams makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense from a financial point of view, getting the Japanese teams in. But for me, just the innovation that's taking place in Japan, how the JL1 were able to attract good talent, but also make people play incredibly smart rugby. I don't know how many JL1 games you've watched this year, but how a Peter Steph the toy plays, for example, or how Sun Goliath uses Colby, or how Isaac Lucas for the Rams, the type of freedom that they have in the Japanese league to use these, say, non-Japanese players in really interesting and creative ways, make those better players, and it makes for really, really good rugby, and not frivolous. Not all scores are high in the Japanese league as it comes to the top 5 teams when they play each other. It's also a 20, 21, 19 scoreline. So defense is taken seriously. I was very impressed by the amount of kicking and the type of kicking that takes place, by the amount of field goals, for example, that you don't even see a lot of in European rugby anymore.
Yeah, it's true.
Love it. Just so much innovation.
Looking back on my chat with Brendon, you can really sense his enthusiasm and his excitement for what Eddie Jones is trying to do with Japan at the moment. I can definitely see what he's saying when he says that the laws of rugby union are evolving to a place that's going to really suit this running all-out attack style of rugby, and I can see it paying off for Japan in the future. I don't necessarily agree with Brendon when he says that he expects Japan to knock over a team like Wales. Though I'm a Wales fan, I can freely acknowledge we're not very good at the moment, but I'm not sure that Japan have the capability to compete at that tier 1 level yet. You have to remember that Japan haven't defeated tier 1 opposition since 2019, and Eddie Jones himself hasn't defeated a tier 1 opposition for 2 years. For me, my biggest worry with Japan is definitely the conditioning. We've seen in the Pacific Nations Cup that they're just not able to play that game style for 80 minutes. They would fall away badly in the second half. We've seen Japan women try to do the same thing in WXV recently, and by the 3rd game in 3 weeks, they were falling off a cliff. They just couldn't maintain that intensity. But it's not all about me. Let me know your thoughts in the replies down below. Next week, we've got a video that is player specific. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but he's South African and he wears a scrum cap. So I'll see you then. If you do want to help support the channel a bit more, you can get membership for just 99 pence a month. If you do sign up for that, you will find an exclusive highlights package of Eddie Jones's Japan playing against Canada in the Pacific Nations Cup, along with more than a dozen other exclusive videos that you cannot find anywhere else. Thanks as always, and I'll see you next time.